Welcome back. We left off with the foreshadowing of Rome. By this point, Rome had defeated the Seleucid Empire, making them a tributary state while pushing for further involvement in the Mediterranean. Rome would later witness the assassination of Julius Caesar, the crowning of Octavian as emperor, and a period of relative stability. Fast forward to the assassination of Commodus and the civil wars that followed. In the struggle for power, Rome faced invasions from both Germanic tribes and Persians on multiple fronts. Germanic tribes such as the Goths, Franks, and Vandals, the Vandals who were so notorious that their name became synonymous with those who willfully destroy or deface property. They disrupted trade in the Roman provinces as they attacked the regions of Danube, the Black Sea, and the Balkans. The Persians would attack from the east, hitting Roman Syria and Mesopotamia, capturing the Roman Emperor Valerian as well. Now, Gaul, being historically significant as Caesar's victory in the Gallic Wars gave him control over the territory encompassing modern day France, Switzerland, Belgium, and Luxembourg. It also became a major source of income for Rome. The region's resources and strategic location made it easy to become a major trade center connecting Italy, Spain, and Britain. The Gaul region experienced frequent changes in rulership, from the Roman conquest to their independence as Gallic Empire, being put back under Roman rule, and then later being invaded by the Goths after the sack of Rome, from which the Western Empire never fully recovered. The Goths themselves would flee to those areas as they were being attacked and displaced by the Huns, who were generally thought to be of Asian descent. The Goths eventually split into the Visigoths and Ostrogoths, with the Ostrogoths allying with the Huns and being used in their military. The Ostrogoths would occupy lands near Romania and Ukraine today, just to kind of give you a tidbit of where they're at in modern geography. The Visigoths established the Kingdom of Toulouse in southern Gaul, often clashing with the Romans, who were once their allies, and the Franks, the latter pushing them into Hispania. Now, there they established the Kingdom of Toledo, ruling nearly all of what would become Spain. By then, Western Rome had effectively ceased to exist as a major power, leaving Rome administration to be continued in the Eastern Empire. Now, religion played a pivotal role during this era, shaping Christianity as we know it today and influencing which biblical texts were included in the Bible and which texts were not. Up until around the 4th century, roughly 90% of the world practiced their own traditional cultural religions, often called polytheistic or pagan. The adoption of many of the Abrahamic belief systems were typically due to conquest and survival rather than personal choice. Now, I promise all of this will tie together in a bigger picture, so just follow me as I go down a brief rabbit hole regarding the pre-conquest religions of several of the regions that we have discussed and will discuss. In the pre-empire era, the region that would become the Akkadian Empire shared religious similarities with Canaan and Kemet, which centered in animism, where nature and celestial bodies were sacred, and multiple deities controlled different aspects of life. Each region had a supreme creator, Ra in Egypt, Anu in Akkad, and El in Canaan. And yes, that's the same El referenced repeatedly in Genesis. In the Tanakh, or the Jewish teachings, which was used to form the Old Testament, in Genesis 1:1 it reads, "In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth." Now, Elohim is the plural form of El, which is a Canaanite deity. Now, the King James Version of the Bible, which is widely used in the United States, translate the word Elohim simply as God. This is significant because Abram, later known as Abraham, who is the patriarch of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, originated in in Mesopotamia, where El was worshipped as their creator god and was the same God in the early teachings, which made its way into what we would now know as the Christian Bible, as the creator of heavens and earth and all that is within, such as humans, animals, etc. Now, I won't even get into the words that were carefully chosen when it mentioned, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Who were the pantheon being addressed? Were these other gods from the ancient Canaanite pantheon? Because one thing for certain, these texts were written prior to the concept of the Holy Trinity, which didn't even exist prior to the first century. And even after the thought took on some type of life, it would be until the Council of Nicaea where the concept was actually finalized and made into doctrine. So, again, who were the others being addressed? Just something to think about. Now, the Canaanite deity El would influence early Hebrew teachings and eventually become the monotheistic God in the Bible before gradually being replaced by Yahweh. In Kemet, you also had Isis, goddess of fertility. In Acadia, you had Ishtar, dubbed as the goddess of sex, fertility, love, among other things. And the Canaanites had Asherah, a mother goddess known for fertility. Back to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 44. The people of Judah continued to offer incense, bake cakes, and leave drink offerings to the Queen of Heaven, known as Asherah, despite Yahweh's warnings as spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. Now, verse 8 reads, "In that ye provoke me unto wrath with the works of your hands, burning incense unto other gods in the land of Egypt, whither ye be gone to dwell, that ye might cut yourselves off, and that ye might be a curse and a reproach among all the nations of the earth." Even after Abraham's covenant with Yahweh to have him and him alone as their God, the descendants of the Canaanites retained many of their ancestral customs, including reverence for Asherah, the Queen of Heaven, and Baal, who was a storm god comparable to the Akkadian god Adad or the Egyptian god Set. Now, the Judeans would respond to Jeremiah's message from Yahweh, who by this time seems to have replaced El, that was seen in the book of Genesis, and who was also a regional storm god to the Canaanites. They responded saying, "As for the word that thou hast spoken unto us in the name of Yahweh, we will not hearken unto thee, but we will certainly do whatsoever thing goeth forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings, and our princes, in the cities of Judah, and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of victuals, and were well, and saw no evil." Now, who was Baal? To the Canaanites, he was a rival of Yahweh, and actually is the term used for the word Lord in the Semitic language. He was a storm god, similar to the Akkadian god Adad, as previously mentioned, or the Kemetic god of chaos, who was a rival to Horus, known as Set. The point being, by the time Abraham's, whose eighth great grandfather was Noah, someone else who was selected by God to be a father of many nations, but by the time his descendants grew, they still retained their old cultural identity, even though it went against what would become Judaism. And even that to this day has a lot of their past cultural elements tucked inside. Now, in the Americas, who were the major deities during the same era? Let's take a look. Now, the Maya storm god was Chak, and like Baal, also helped crops grow. You also had Hurricane, where the word hurricane comes from, was the Mayan god of chaos, storms, and wind, and also shared similarities with Baal. Now, Itzamania would compare to El of the Canaanites, and the Mayan deity Ixchel is comparable to Asherah, being the deity of childbirth, fertility, and medicine. Now, both Ixchel and Asherah would be associated with a sacred tree. Now, for Asherah, you would see how the Canaanites had Asherah poles, which were sacred altar poles involved with fertility rites. And for the Mayas, you would have the ceiba tree, where sometimes poles were also used in similar rites along with other things. In the different Peruvian cultures, you would see several celestial deities. To the Inca, the sun deity was known as Inti, their sun god, who is parallel to Ra. For the Wari and the Moche, the names of their sun deities may have been lost to time, but doesn't change the fact that they also had sun deities. So even though all of these cultures were widespread, they shared pretty much the same idea when it came to the universe and their place in it. Now, the indigenous tribes of the Americas, particularly the southeastern portion of the United States, you would have similar cultures in which nature was a central focal point, and sacrifices to the sun and moon, along with festivals based on the celestial bodies, were also done. They would share a similarity with ancient Kemet in regard to their deities that had animal qualities or were represented by them. Now, back to Western Rome. The Visigoths, who would eventually become the Catholic monarchs, were originally pagans until they converted to Arianism around the time they settled in the Roman Empire. Now, this would come about 16 years after the Council of Nicaea of the year 325, which was deeper than just coming up with the layout of the Christian Bible by choosing what books to include or exclude. Until then, there were several sects of Christianity. And although the early Christians that are always mentioned were not actually Christians at all, but Jews, and more on that later. However, after Paul came to the scene and switched from being a massacring, you know, machine, just massacring Christians, to now spreading Christianity, except he was going against the grain. For those unfamiliar, Paul, although a Jew by birth, being born to a Jewish mother, he himself was also a Roman citizen and lived in Taurus, modern Turkey, which was a Roman city. Roman status was passed down through the father, which means that at some point his father or another male ancestor was granted Roman citizenship, stating how his letters were also written in Greek, which also his writings were the bulk of the New Testament, as 13 to 14 books out of the 27 were his. Now, and they were all written in Greek. So this shows that he also would have a Roman education. Now, after not being able to rid the empire of all the Jews as they became good at going underground and thriving, he then followed the slogan of, if you can't beat them, join them, and became a huge figure in the New Testament. Now, the thing is, his teachings went against those of Jesus and his disciples. Paul would even go against Jesus' own brother, James, in ideology and do the one thing that Jesus instructed them not to do. Now, I'm not saying Paul was a double agent, air quotes being used, or secretly serving Rome after his supposed conversion to Christianity, as he was a Jew by birth and a part of the Pharisees sect, which were historically less accepting of Hellenistic ways. Now, anyway, he would be the big push behind converting those known as Gentiles or Goyim, basically anyone who wasn't of Jewish lineage. During the time period of Jesus' ministries, he actually refrained from teaching outside of his people's reach and instructed his disciples to only go to the lost sheep of Israel. Now, regardless of how progressive Jesus was, we have to understand that he was a devout Jew who was raised in that culture and, as stated, did not come to change the law but to fulfill it. He did not and would not have given the green light to do anything different after his death than what he himself done during his life. Also, Paul never met Jesus, but was said to have seen him only after resurrection. Now, things that Paul did, which was a red flag, was giving the teachings to Gentiles who would blend in their pagan ideas and rituals. He also ended the need to keep Mosaic laws, which Jesus himself kept. And yes, some people will say that after the crucifixion, those laws were done away with, which is okay if that's what you believe, that's your belief. However, looking at the scripture for what it is, he did not come to change not one dot within the Torah. So, the stopping of the holy feasts, the ending of observing the dietary laws, and teaching that all you need is faith to be saved and no longer need to keep the strict laws and practices in which was commanded by the Torah. These things would have been the topic of discussion during the Council of Jerusalem, in which Peter and his brother in Christ, well, Peter and Jesus' actual brother James, along with the others, debated and disagreed with Paul and what he was doing. Now, why do I say Paul was a double agent? What seemed to be a good, just cause to spread salvation to everyone was actually a seed being planted by the Romans to hijack the Jewish belief system, use it to unite the populations within the Roman Empire, and begin the process of using it as a tool to control the empire and end revolts. This would be when pagan things like Christmas, which is just the winter solstice celebration of the Roman sun god Sol Invictus, and Easter would slip into Christianity. Now, Easter, of course, not being actually linked to Jesus resurrecting, but as a spring fertility festival related to fertility goddesses. Also, holy relics, which would be a huge no-no in the Old Testament, as well as the imagery used when depicting things such as Jesus or angels or other saints. Even when you see the sun halo around the images of Jesus, a symbol of the formal pagan sun worship, now visualized as the Son of God instead of the Sun. This would go against the second commandment, which states, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them." But I digress. Now, follow along as I string this web of connections. So, as the message went from being a Jewish thing, still following Jewish laws, it was then given to the Gentiles while removing the importance of adhering to Jewish customs, making it more digestible to the newly converted Gentiles who could still keep their pagan traditions and have fewer reasons to resist. Paul would spread the ideology to Asia Minor, Greece, and Rome. And after the Council of Jerusalem, the message basically became distinctly different from its Jewish inception. Now, a major fire that destroyed much of Rome in 64 CE would be blamed on the Christians who were different and did not keep the Roman gods in reverence, as Rome was very much so still pagan at that time. This would be the start of persecutions of the Christians, which would go on to about the year 313. Now, cities like Antioch and Corinth, which were under the former Seleucid Empire and were also a part of the fast Christian movement, would make their scenes in the New Testament, such as Corinth and Antioch, which that's where the term Christians, I guess, was first used as, the people were called followers of Christ. However, the Edict of Milan would come around the end of that era of persecutions where it was no longer illegal to practice the Christian faith. Now, Constantine, admiring how the movement was able to thrive and the community unified, even against persecution, made him realize that if he could control that movement and become the head of it, essentially he could unite the already fractured Roman Empire. Due to the strong connections the Christians had all throughout the empire, a clear hierarchy, and obedience to their religion, he had a plan to unite the different sects and help them in their eternal internal beefs over their core beliefs. You would have the Arians, who taught that Jesus was not God but a subordinate to him, as he was created by God, so they could not be equal. You also have the views of the Athanasius, and I probably butchered that, but it's spelled Athanasius, who held the thought that the Son and the Father were one and the same. Now, the rejection of the Arian ideology was intentional and already determined, as it would hopefully end the issues between the different groups, unifying the church, making it easy to control. Now, the date that Easter was standardized to and also was purposely separated from the Jewish Passover, which fell around the same time frame, was also a topic of discussion. They made rules on how to deal with members who folded under pressure of persecution and followed pagan practices, as most in attendance were survivors of the persecutions. A lot of them lost friends and relatives, I would assume, to the very government who summoned them to unify their religion. Now, by the year 380, Christianity would become the official religion of Rome, and the head bishops would begin working close with the emperors and being used as the middleman between the rulers and the people. And over time, this would give Roman rulers loyalty from his local governments, and the bishops would gain political protection and have the influence over civic life. From the year 380 on up, Jews would now become major targets of forced conversions and persecutions, would take place all over Christian Europe. Now, the people who would be carrying these out would be your Christian clergy who were just following the orders of the Roman rulers. This would go on from about the year 380 to about 450. Now, the Visigoths, who were Arians in faith, would not persecute the Jews and was often friendly with them, as they had more in common than with the Nicene sect, as they also viewed that Jesus was not equal to God because one was created by the other. Now, this, in the eyes of any Nicene groups, would make the Visigoths heretics. So I guess they bonded over being heretics. Now, this would all change in the year 587 as the Visigoths were converted to the Nicene sect of Christianity under King Richard in the year 587. Now, this would unify the whole Visigothic kingdom of Hispania under the Nicene doctrine. And after this, anti-Semitic views grew immensely, and there were mass persecutions, and the banning of Jews even existing began to ramp up. So, in the year 589, at the Third Council of Toledo, Jews were forbidden to marry Christians or to hold any office. By the Fourth Council in 633, Jews were no longer able to have Christian slaves and faced pressures to convert. By the Fifth Council, it was made mandatory to give loyalty oaths to the king and details on how to deal with treason. By the Sixth Council in 638, this one forbade all Jews from living in Spain. And of course, all of the Jewish landholdings and wealth would be retained by the church to do who knows with. Now, by the Eighth Council, circumcision and the kosher laws were forbidden, as well as their holy festivals. Fast forward to the 12th Council, and the enslavement of Jews was now allowed along with other restrictions placed upon them. By the 13th, Jewish children were taken from their parents and put inside the household of Christians, more than likely as servants or slaves. You decide how you would like to interpret that. The next few councils up until the 18th, which was the last, accused the Jews of conspiring with North African Muslims. And because of this, more enslavement and the abduction of Jewish kids to be given to Christian homes to be raised, as well as the confiscating of more property and wealth, started to happen. Now, just 9 years after the 18th Council, the Visigothic Empire would fall to the Islamic Caliphates. Now, we have come full circle, the harvesting of the seed that Paul had planted. By bringing Gentiles into the fold, the original Jewish movement was hijacked by the Gentiles, who labeled the Jews as heretics and began heavily persecuting them under the same faith that grew out of them. Talk about a plot twist. Now, let's go back to about the year 395, where major issues in Rome's division will lead to disruptions to the Silk Road, which will lead to what we now know as the Dark Ages in Western Rome, although the rest of the world outside of Western Rome was thriving. Another important note to mention is the capital of the empire was moved in the year 330 CE, and while Western Rome was suffering a deep cultural suppression, the new capital of Constantinople was thriving and still seen as a connector between the East and the West. The invasion of the Germanic tribes would play a big role on why trade was stopped, as the Vandal tribes raided Western Rome around the supposed Dark Ages, and I feel that it was partially intentional due to the fact that the church was starting to change and become more of a political tool. And with that, the church being instrumental in society, this would set them up to become people of like an immense power. So, could be that, or could have just been a coincidence. Now, the people at this time would be heavily influenced by the church, as in those days there were no separation between church and state. The church during those times were hugely political, to the point where bishops and popes had more influence than kings and queens. The church would also be responsible for people's souls, as they taught about heaven, hell, and salvation, even selling coupons. Indulgences. Let's say selling indulgences, which that was a tongue twister there. But yeah, selling indulgences, which to basically break it down in the simplest terms was just a get into heaven free card, if I had to say. Now, essentially, the church would go on to be seen as the hero who would have brought the region out of that harsh decline and strengthened the loyalty and the obedience towards them as a result of that. I would also like to point out that the concept of hell was not always what we believe now. In fact, when it comes to Judaism, there was no hell per se in the sense as we know it today. There, however, was a Sheol, and that's spelled Sheol, where the dead was to go, which was a neutral place of silence and darkness for all souls. Now, as mentioned earlier, after the Babylonian exile, new views started to enter the Jewish doctrine from outside influences. You would soon see Gehenna, which is the term for the modern idea of hell's fire. Now, although Gehenna was a location where the site Tophet, Tophet, was in which some Jews were said to have sacrificed their children to Baal or Molech, a Canaanite deity. The term Tophet is said to either relate to drums, for which was played to drown out the children's cries, but another idea is that there was some sort of fiery pit. Now, fires were said to burn constantly, as there were a lot of sacrifices to the Canaanite deity, which the perpetual fire came from. Now, in Second Kings 23:10, King Josiah desecrates Topheth in the valley of Hinnon, so no one could sacrifice their son or daughter there to Molech. This gives me the impression it was something used for burning bodies, but regardless of the meaning, it was never an internal flame of damnation. Jews would even begin to believe that it was more of a temporary burning for purification, but the concept of hell as we know it today would be the invention of the Romans, as this would also control the population's behavior. Constantinople was always culturally different from the city of Rome, as the region's culture was heavily influenced by Alexander the Great. And also, that region separated in theology and not accepting the Pope as being their de facto ruler. Now, the Visigoths and other Germanic tribes would disrupt the infrastructure in Western Rome, causing the Silk Road to bypass them as safety was no longer guaranteed. Now, also adding to the crumbling, and this, of course, would be in a different time period, but Pope Leo crowning Charlemagne the Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day, which technically was treason. Now, while the empire already had an empress who was known as Empress Irene of Athens, ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire. Now, this would actually play a part into the Great Schism of 1054, which we will discuss later. Now, Charlemagne's coronation would imply that the Pope could transfer imperial legitimacy to a Western ruler, which was seen as an insult, and also the Romans would still view the Visigothic kings as barbarians who ruined the old Roman order and now controlled Roman territory after they were allowed into the empire. And basically, they would look at them as anything under the sun except equal. Now, genetically, the majority of the people who were in Spain at that time were of actual Iberian descent, of course, mixed in with the Romans. And the Visigoths, who were nowhere near as populous as the indigenous Iberians, would also mix in with the admixture of the Iberian Romans. But let's put a pause on Hispania for now and take a look what was going on in the Levant region, who was making its way back to mainstream due to the birth of Islam. Now, around the year 572, the Prophet Muhammad was born among the Quraysh people. Now, he was the grandson of a tribal leader. And after the death of his parents, his grandfather and uncle, who would succeed as tribal leader, essentially raised him. By the time he became a young adult, his tribe was known for having successful merchants who dominated commerce from regions between the Indian Ocean near East Africa to the Mediterranean, as well as known for being miners. The tribe was known for putting commercial business and unity above rivalry, which was until Muhammad's revelations started to attack their core beliefs. This caused tension between him and his people. Being raised by the tribal leader, he was protected, which caused a strained relationship among the different tribes, prompting Muhammad to take some of his followers to what is now Medina. From there, he would broker peace between the Banu Az and the Khazaraj, and that definitely was probably butchered, but it's spelled Khazraj. Now, peace were brokered with these people, as well as a peace that was brokered through the Constitution of Medina with three of the largest clans of Jews, the Banu Kainuka, the Banu Nadir, and the Banu Qurayza. From this, they basically agreed to defend each other during times of battle and to have trade. Now, these Jewish clans would be a combination of the descendants of the Jews who were either exiled to the region after Babylonian captivity, Jews who migrated due to trade, and local Arabs who converted over time. In Mecca, the Umayyads were a similar enemy of Muhammad until he captured the city and created an Arab unity. Now, there would be disagreements that would lead to the Jewish communities being seized, and the men and women would be banished. Now, for one, they were banished to Syria, the men, that is, while the women and children either stayed or left with their husbands. And of course, their property was confiscated. Now, for the Banu Nadir, who were also a part of the Constitution of Medina, they were banished from the area once they broke the treaty by trying to assassinate Muhammad. They would end up being sent to Saudi Arabia. And the Banu Qurayza would side with invaders against the Muslims, and as a result, the men would be executed while the women and children were enslaved. This unity was beneficial to all parties while good relations lasted, as the Umayyads controlled the trade routes to Syria, and Muhammad gave them an important role in the new order. But as time went on, the Islamic conquest grew along with the spread of Islam in many neighboring regions. Just after the death of Muhammad in the year 632, the peace that he created fell apart as many argued on who the successor should be. Now, almost 80 years after the death of Muhammad, the Umayyad Caliphate pushed their conquest towards the Iberian Peninsula, known as Hispania. And if you know what happened in the year 711, you know exactly where I'm going with this. Now, prior to the Umayyads, the Romans took over the area of Hispania after the defeat of the great general Hannibal and his Carthaginian forces in the Second Punic War. Carthage was founded by the Phoenicians in the 9th century BC. Due to their great naval force, they dominated northwest Africa, Iberia, Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, Malta, and the Balearic Islands. They had major control of the maritime trade routes, trading with West Asia, Northern Europe, West Africa, and a strong possibility that they traded with the Americas as well. Belonging to the Canaanite people, the Phoenicians were one of the greatest traders, shipbuilders, and sailors of the ancient world. And they are said to have given the modern world their first alphabet system. Now, as a result of their defeat to the Romans, they were stripped of their overseas territories, along with some African ones, and was prohibited from waging war outside of Africa. Now, we will definitely discuss more about the Phoenicians later. Now, the Count of Ceuta, Julian, gave his word that he would aid the Berbers, who would become known as the Moors, in their cause to conquer the Iberian Peninsula, as he no longer honored the alliance he had with the king of the Visigoths. He assured the Moors that a vast majority of the Goths shared the same sentiment. Some say that Roderick's court disgraced Julian's daughter, making a mockery of him, which fueled his desire for revenge. Due to the eternal strife fueled by claims of who should rule the Visigoths after the assassination of Witiza, civil wars made the region unstable. Now, with the Visigothic kingdom weakened and alliances broken, betrayal was the only way to ensure some power and autonomy was kept. While fighting the Basques in the north, Roderick, known as the last king of the Goths, caught wind of the invasion happening in the southern portion of the kingdom, instantly dividing his camp and quickly making his way to the Berbers, gathering men to squash the invaders. Then, realizing the severity of the situation, he made a speech to his army at Cordoba, calling out to them as he stood before them under dire circumstances. But due to the internal conflict between them, all did not accept him as the rightful king to the throne and felt that the beloved Witiza Hears should rule. It was believed that it was Witiza who tortured Roderick's father, the rightful heir to the throne, and left him to perish in prison. Now, his great grandfather, Kindeswinth, was also a great ruler, and having being the same blood that ran through his veins, I guess gave him the strength to take back what was thought to be rightfully his. But being invaded by Berber forces led by none other than Julian, who Roderick, I'm sure, swore to make him pay with his betrayal with his life, a call to unite as one to defeat the Moors was made and to become once again a powerful kingdom. Now, not realizing the contempt that his countrymen had for him, he foolishly put Witiza's sons in command of his wings as a sign of good faith and promising that they would be rewarded greatly if victorious. As the two forces clashed on July 19th, 711, the unthinkable happened. Before Roderick's eyes, the commanders of his wings formations pulled back, exposing his center and leaving him vulnerable to the Muslim invaders. It was at this moment where Roderick realized that his fate at the betrayal of not only Julian, but the Gothic nobles as well as Witiza's sons. After this total victory, the Visigothic monarchy would be obliterated, and any hope of Witiza's sons reclaiming the throne was essentially gone. That as time went by and the name Tariq was held in high honor and prestige for the conquering of the peninsula, so much that his overlord, Musa, became angry and wanted the prestige for himself. He then went behind Tariq, conquering areas that were left untouched, bringing more of the empire under Islamic rule and setting up his heirs in place to rule. Ultimately, both Musa and Tariq would die far away from Al Andalus, the newly gained territory of the Moors, by their amazing feats of battle. Shortly after the spread of Islamic rule throughout Iberia, a Berber revolt broke out among the Umayyad. Now, the revolt was due to the Berbers being treated like second class citizens to the Arabs after contributing heavily to the success of the conquest of Hispania, along with other grievances such as taxation and slavery on the non Arab Muslim converts, which was a violation of Islamic law. Now, starting in Tangiers around the year 740, the revolt eventually made its way through the rest of North Africa and Al Andalus. The Umayyad Caliphate was eventually overthrown by the Abbasids, the third caliphate to succeed the Prophet Muhammad, which descended from Muhammad's uncle. After the dethroning of the Umayyad, Abd al-Rahman managed to evade the Abbasids and escape to Iberia, where he founded Cordoba and the Andalusian branch of the Umayyad dynasty. It was this event that led to almost 800 years of Moorish rule of Al-Andalus, aka southern Spain. And this would be where, the areas encompassed of now Sevilla, Granada, all of those areas would be. Now, during their long reign, the Islamic Caliphates actually introduced over 4,000 words to the Spanish language. Now, we must not forget that mathematics, science, writing, poetry, medicine, astrology, astronomy, city planning, libraries, along with the host of other things, were prominent in ancient North Africa due to the connections with the Seleucid Empire and the cultural exchange with the Indus Valley and others. The spread of math and science was something that, of course, took off like wildfire. Now, they occupied a region that was influenced heavily by the Canaanite people, who we would now know as the Phoenicians. But like many other groups, the Phoenicians were basically just a loosely united group of Canaanite city states that created a network of trade, knowledge, and skills. Some of their major cities were located in modern North Africa, Lebanon, and Syria, such as Tyre, Byblos, Sidon, and Carthage. Or maybe that's pronounced Sidon. I like Sidon. They were known to be seafaring people, master shipbuilders, and merchants as well. Not only did they create the prototype for the alphabet that a huge portion of the modern world use today, they also were hired out by many well known empires to man their navy, such as being hired out by the Egyptians, discussed in episode 1, but also to build their warships. And along with a lot of their improvements, came the intermixing of people as the Moors had harems filled with women from all over the region whom many had children with. A lot of regions openly accepted the Moors into their regions as a form of protection, and violence was not needed at all as, again, they accepted them in. The Moorish rule also brought about religious tolerance for Christians and Jews alike. Both Christians and Jews were able to practice their religion openly without any interference or pressure from the Moorish rulers to convert to Islam. Non-Muslims in Al-Andalus were even allowed to hold different positions. The Moorish overlords also did not convert Christian churches into mosques, which showed their respect for people and their rights. It was because of this tolerance that caused many of the non-Muslims to respect the Moors greatly and convert on their own free will. Now, areas in Spain that owes some gratitude, in my opinion, to the Moors are the areas of, and yes, some of these words will be butchered, but Algeciras, Tarifa, Barbat, Cuenca, Guadalajara, Ubeda, Murcia, Granada, Badajoz, Madrid, Almeria, Albacete, Cadiz, Huelva, Jaén, Salamanca, Ibiza, Malaga, Cartagena, Toledo, Valencia, and Merida, to name a few. With any growing empire, similar problems will eventually arise, though. And unfortunately for the Moors of Al-Andalus, they were no different. Cordoba experienced a civil war known as Fitna of Al-Andalus. After the death of Al-Hakam and his son, Hisham, at age 11, the time of his father's death, he was basically left in charge. Now, the infighting resulted in the kingdom breaking up into smaller kingdoms known as taifas, in which many made deals with Christian kingdoms for protection. As the Christian kingdoms of the north began to rise and the golden age of Al-Andalus was coming to an end, a call to remove Islam from the region was answered. Now, this would be important because removing Islam and their control would then leave a vacuum open for a new power to take over. And as you will see in the next video, that power would be none other than the Catholic monarchs, bringing back Spain under complete Christian rule. Now, however, removing Islam from that region, the intricate systems that made the Islamic region so great were destroyed or repurposed for the Catholic monarchs. This opened up the doors to corruption and extortion, and to preserve peace, many Muslim city-states began to either pay tribute or face the wrath of the Christians. We will end here today, as this is a lot to digest. But on the next video, we will get into the Reconquista, where Isabella and Ferdinand will become the main characters of the start of a new era. And this is where we will start getting into the age of exploration, um, especially in the Americas and the Caribbean, as well as the introduction of new groups of people, such as the Taino, the Arawak, the different people in Mesoamerica and South America, as well as North America. So until next time, have a good one.